Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so once again, welcome back to your professional diploma in digital marketing. Today we're going to further into tracking our digital marketing KPIs. Let's just take an opportunity just to look at what we're going to be achieving throughout this lesson that's ahead of us. And first of all, we're going to have a look at understanding exactly how we track our performance. And then we'll explore Google Analytics, which is an amazing tool that is an absolute must for every digital marketer. We've discussed it in a bit of detail too, but we'll be peeling back the layers in this lesson. And then we'll get familiar with UTMs, which we'll explore towards the end of this lesson. So let's start off with the first subject of today's lesson, which is tracking. So essentially, we use tracking to log our users. So essentially, just people and their behavior, and this way we can measure where traffic is coming from. Session duration, which is essentially how long someone was on a website for, IP addresses, so we can actually track which country they're coming from, etc. And obviously which pages have been visited the most or at all in general. There's a lot of information that tracking can provide us, but obviously the information that matters to us is what's most specific to marketing, which is what we'll be covering as we progress. Remember, our example from the previous lesson was based on custom comfort. One of custom comfort's digital marketing goals is sales. In order to measure the success, one of the KPIs we looked at for this was the conversion rate. So we want to know of how many people that saw our ad actually went ahead and made a purchase. But we want to find out more information than just that. We want to find out what those conversions or where those conversions actually came from. Which channel did it come from? What kind of path users took in order to get there? Did they go through some sort of social media platform? Was it direct to the website? Was it by word of mouth? And by answering a simple question on a contact form, we could actually find that information out pretty quickly. That is what we need tracking for. It's in order to give us more information than just superficial metrics. So it's all good and well having fantastic objectives lined up and to have our budget ready to spend. But if we don't have tracking in place, then it's completely pointless, because then we have no idea of what we're doing in terms of what channel is performing or bringing you the sales and traffic that you're actually seeing. We want to track the performance beyond the nice to know metrics. We need to dig a little bit deeper essentially. So tracking is incredibly important. It makes your marketing measurable. Once it becomes measurable, then you know which channels affect the bottom line, which is incredibly important to actually paint a bigger picture of how marketing impacts our business. And then we can plan and test changes effectively too. So you actually know what you're doing and you're not going in there blind, which is vitally important for strategic planning. This is what separates digital marketing from traditional marketing. The problem with traditional marketing is that it's not really measurable. There are aspects of digital marketing which are still not measurable. However, it's far more measurable than what the traditional counterparts actually have to offer. And that's why our preference will always be digital marketing going forward. There are many ways of actually tracking your performance, and the one that you choose will be completely dependent on your business needs and resources. On one hand, you could manually track your performance, but for a larger business, this would take up a lot of time and many of the company's resources in order to do it successfully. Then we have standard reporting available to us within those platforms. And those platforms would be the ones that you have identified as the best option for your business, such as Google Ads or Microsoft Advertising, Facebook Business Manager, Twitter Analytics, etc. Just depends on how you're portraying that piece of marketing. In order to get even more of those standard analytics, in a lot of cases you would need to install something that we call Pixel. And here you would see, for example, on the right hand side of your screen right here in the screenshot, an example of Twitter's universal website tag. All right. Similar option exists for Facebook, for example. All you need to do is install a piece of code on your website. So all you would do is just copy in here and then add it to the bottom of your pages. That way you can actually track what users do on your website after clicking on your posts or ads on Twitter. So it will essentially give you a more specific breakdown of everything that is actually happening and the user's sort of activity on your website, which is extremely useful to us, especially when we're going over the metrics to see how people interact with the content on our website. Then you can also install plugins on your website for tracking purposes, which is probably something you should speak to your developer about because it can get pretty advanced around this part over here. And then we finally have UTMs, which are essentially just snippets that you can add to your URLs to determine the source of your traffic. And they are really interesting, to say the least. So we'll take a deeper look at them towards the end of this lesson. But the main difference is that UTMs don't really require any change in the code of your website, which is quite good because we want our URLs to be quite specific and identifiable to people when they see them so that they can be useful and obviously become household. That's the key objective. But if we keep changing them, then it's harder for people to actually remember what those URLs are. But thankfully, making use of UTMs doesn't require us to make any changes to our URLs. You may just be starting off a business and may not want to spend too much time on setting up tracking, etc. But I would, however, recommend that you do. But if you're using a CMS or any other way of storing your business info, there may actually be an easier option for you to set up your tracking settings internally. A CMS or content management system basically allows you to manage your digital content on your website. One example is WordPress, but if you want to use some other options, you could expand into ideas such as Wix or even Weebly. So have a look at yours, if you're using one that is, and you might find some really handy tracking tools in there. You may also have heard of WCMS, which is essentially a web content management system, which stores your product pages on e-commerce sites. Certainly handy and certainly something that you should look into, especially as a new business owner. Using cookies is how browsers identify people on the web. They change pages and save information. There are essentially two types of cookies. There's a session cookie, which is erased when you close off a browser, and then there's also a persistent cookie, where there is an expiration that is set on creation. So essentially, that tracking could last for many years, and sometimes it doesn't go away at all unless you manually remove them, meaning that a certain website could track you forever. So let's move on with our next subject of today's lesson, web analytics. First of all, what does that actually mean? What does the term web analytics actually mean? Well, according to Hotjar Web Analytics, it is the process of collecting and analyzing as well as reporting on a website data in order to understand a user's behavior and optimize performance. So with our tracking in place, we are now able to collect data. The next step, however, is then to analyze the findings, see what trends we can find, and then report on exactly that. And we do all of this so that we can understand how our customers behave and then adjust our content based on just that. You will find that most of our marketing efforts are about finding out who our customers actually are, essentially understanding them. In the end, they are the reason we do everything that we do. So generally, the first thing that comes up when we talk about web analytics and tracking is something called Google Analytics. It's a free service that provides web statistics and analytical tools, and it's the most widely used analytics platform in the world. There are many different others, many of which cost a pretty penny, but Google Analytics, however, is surprisingly free, which is quite great for the new business owner. If you're going to understand anything about Google Analytics, then you need to know what an attribution model actually is. It is the rule or essentially set of rules that determines how credit or sales and conversions is assigned to touch points. Sounds a bit more complicated than what it needs to be perhaps. So let me just break it down for you and peel back the layers. People will more than likely see your ads, websites and posts more once before actually converting. Think about it for yourself. When you see an ad, do you immediately buy the product? Usually not. You see the ad, then you might keep on scrolling, and then the ad might pop up again on a different channel. Then you may start to get a little bit more interested. You research the company, you read reviews, you might even visit their websites and have a browse. Then you might even leave the website again. But then you get one of those emails saying that you left your shopping cart unattended, right? I know I've certainly got those a few times. So you might visit the website again and finally complete the purchase. This is what is meant by conversion path and all the interactions that you're having with the business. And within the attribution models, we are giving more credit or weight to some of the interactions that you've had with the business than others. We're trying to determine which interaction was the one to cause the conversion, in this case, a purchase essentially. If you have an ad on Facebook, it will tell you, if you've set things up properly that is, which is the last clicked ad that led to the conversion that you're tracking, which is the last click keyword that you have in your search campaigns that led to a sale. That is what is meant by assigning a credit for those types of conversions. And it's the touch point that is the keyword or that ad or whatever the customer last interacted with. This is all very important information that we can certainly use to advance our business and the understanding of the metrics. There are various attribution models which we'll be spending a lot more time on later on in this module. Google Analytics has what we call a last click attribution model, which means that all credit is given to the final click. So if we use an example for this, say you see an ad on Google for a handbag. You may have a look, check out the website, have a browse, and then get distracted. Later on, you might see another ad for that same handbag on Facebook. You could click on it again and then decide to purchase that bag in that moment. With the last click attribution model, all credit of that sale would go to the Facebook ad that you had just seen. The other touch points or interactions that you had with this before would not be factored in at all. This type of attribution modeling has its pros and cons though, but don't worry about that too much for now. We'll spend a bit more time on that as we progress throughout this lesson and the module that lies ahead. Then there are some analytics terms to understand before you actually go into the platforms itself. There is a user, which is referring to a person, and then there is a session. And that essentially is just a group of interactions with your site that we can measure. And your session duration, which is essentially the number of minutes that someone was interacting within your site. What happens with a session is that if there has been inactivity on the site for 30 minutes, then the session will be closed. One person can be responsible for more than just one session though, just like one person can be responsible for more than just one impression. Then we have a bounce rate, which, as we mentioned in the first lesson, is just a percentage of users who exited your site after the first page that they saw. So they landed on your homepage, for example, they weren't interested in what they saw, and they left. That would be referred to as a bounce in this case. Then there is a conversion rate, which will also come up in general throughout the course. And it doesn't just apply to analytics, as it's just referring to the number of people who have converted, divided by all the visitors. And then finally, there is direct, which, as we also mentioned in the first lesson, is just the users who went directly to your site by typing or bookmarking your URL. Again, direct is generally a result of other marketing, but it's important to monitor when you're looking at things like branding, ad, recall, and reputation, etc. After all this talk about Google Analytics, let's have a look at how we actually create an account with Google Analytics so that you can start getting some data yourself, if you'd like, of course. So first of all, as Google Analytics, it is Google product, right? As it is called Google Analytics, it is a Google product. So essentially, you'll need a Google account to actually operate. It's a very smart process for them if you think about it. So if you have a Gmail account, this means that you can have a Google account, or you already have a Google account. Next, you simply go to analytics.google.com and use your Google account details to create an analytics account. Then you simply click on Start Measuring. All right. By clicking on Start Measuring, you immediately pick up the analytics page and start pulling in the data that you can see in front of you at the moment. Once you've done this, you'll have to select your account name though. So here you actually pick up on what your account is going to be called. If you're doing marketing for a specific company only and are only working with the company assets, you could use their name, for example. If you're part of a marketing agency, however, and we'll be looking at several different websites, different businesses and so on, then you might want to use something more general. This would be dependent on you though, and your preferences. Then below you would pick up on your account data sharing settings, so essentially your Google products and services, which is your benchmarking, technical support, and account specialists. If you choose them, that is, it is then easier for Google support to actually help you. So I would say definitely go for it. The next window that is going to pop up is setting up your property. So this would refer to the website or app that you would actually monitor on your account. In this case, you would again have to give your name, add your time zone, and currency that you want your data displayed in. Once you've made your choices, then simply click on Next. Then you would add your business information. First, you would add the industry that you're working in. There is a range of options that you can choose from. For the purpose of custom comfort, I chose home and garden. Then you pick the size of your business and how you intend to use Google Analytics. And as you can see, there is a whole lot of information available. You can measure customer engagement with the site of the app, optimize the site or app experience, measure data across multiple devices and even platforms as well, optimize your advertising cost, increase your conversions, measure your content monetization, analyze your online sales, measure app installs, measure lead generation, and so much more. So once you've added your preferences, not all of them might be applicable to you, and that's okay. All that is left for you to do is simply click on Create. Before your account is created, you'll have to agree to the terms and conditions of Google Analytics, and then you'll be redirected to the admin section of Google Analytics. Here you can then finally set up a data stream. So you would essentially add a website or an app to your account to start measuring and pulling in the data. It works very similar, but let's just stick with the website for now. Once you click on the web, this pop-up will appear, and then you'll have to add the website URL to give it a stream name. This essentially is pretty handy if you have several websites for the same company, potentially for different locations also. Then you can choose to make use of enhancers or enhancement measurement tools to analyze more than just standard page view measurements. Then once you click on Create, this next field here is going to pop up. So for now, we have only created your account and told Google what we want to track from the data that's presented over the website or the app, but that doesn't mean that we're actually collecting data just yet. At this point, Google has no way of actually measuring the data. That is what we need the global site tag for. In order for Google to actually collect data, the global site tag must be added before the head tag of every page on your site. So you add a string of code to the back end of your website so that Google actually knows what's happening on the site. It's very important. Without this part, there would be no data that Google can actually track. So this is an example of WordPress, one of the CMSs that we spoke about earlier. This is the back end of the website, so essentially the code. If you look here, this is the head tag that I was mentioning earlier. And then below, you can actually see the snippet that I copied from the Google Analytics, the Google site tag. And then I pasted it in here. It starts with the global site tag and ends with the script. Once I save this, Google will be able to start collecting data from my site. Now, in this case, I'm using WordPress. So this tag is added to every page automatically. There are so many different ways of installing this tag that we won't be able to get through today. So once Google Analytics starts pulling through the data, we can actually start to see some very important information that we can utilize to either streamline our site a little bit more, maybe make it a bit more engaging, or maybe focus on the retention of the clients who are already, or potential clients who are already coming through to our site. We get this information for very specific reasons, and depending on what type of business we operate or what the reason for looking at the analytics is, will depend on what we actually do with this information or what story it tells us, because all the data is really doing is just telling us a story of engagement, right? This is when Google starts picking up on the data and starts portraying it in a measurable fashion. Once we've set everything up and we go through to the application that we set up or just Google Analytics portal, we can then start to see some very important information, such as how many users we have coming through to our website in total, how many of those are new users, and if those numbers are going up or down on average, and we can actually filter that as well. Then we have average engagement time, which is very important, because depending on the size of your website, you want to know if people are actually going through all the information that's on there. If you have a very small, quick to scroll through website, you can't expect that number to be too big. However, if your website is content heavy, then you at least want to see those numbers increase a little bit more so that you can actually see people are engaging with the content that your website has to offer. And then of course we have total revenue, which is what our website is able to generate through sales. This is a very important number to keep track of, because we want to see if our website is actually telling enough of a story to engage with clients to a point where they then are convinced enough to make a purchase of either our products or sales. Now we can obviously track this with regards to different variables on the X and Y axis. We have time versus amount. Okay, very important that we track the time aspect to this. It is very, very important. We can also filter it for between last 7 days to 1 month to 1 year. And within those time periods, we can also see how many users we've had on the website. So if we make a change, for instance, at the start of a month to our website that we think is going to be really exciting and really engaging, at least we'll be able to see what the performance of our website was in drawing new users in, and obviously seeing the metrics with regards to that, to post the launch of something new on our website so that we can see if it actually has an impact or not. And that's why looking at the date and timestamp on data analytics is so vitally important. What's really important for us as well is seeing where the engagement is coming from. So from which countries the engagement is coming from. And we say that is important because this will definitely help us streamline our marketing, our efforts, essentially, how we structure these ads, and obviously what we position in these ads in order to be more engaging for the people in those countries where we're getting the bulk of the visits from. You can get a lot of information from these Google Analytics, and this is just a very basic overview of what it could look like. Obviously, the data can get a lot more in depth, which is something we're going to cover a bit more as we progress through the course. But for now, just understand the basics of the information that we can get from Google Analytics and how it would obviously benefit us to streamline our websites and obviously streamline our advertising efforts. Then apart from Google Analytics, there is a little something called UTMs. And essentially, a UTM is a piece of code that can be added to a URL, which is used for tracking more information about campaigns. How are they helpful? Well, essentially they provide more info to Google Analytics in regards to where the traffic is actually coming from. You may have many links in UTMs tell you which links are doing all the work. This is extremely helpful, as I'm sure you can imagine. Google Analytics can tell you where the traffic has come from, and it can break down the different demographics of people who are visiting your site, which is extremely helpful, as I'm sure you can imagine too. But what it can't do sometimes is tell you which campaign the traffic is actually coming from, the exact ad that the traffic is coming from, or the keyword, etc. And this is where the UTMs actually come into play. They provide this information to Google, which is why they are so extremely useful to us. So just to reiterate, this is what UTMs can answer for you in terms of Google tracking. It can tell you which keywords are converting if you haven't linked to your Google ads or to your analytics, or if you're using a completely different search engine which can't link to analytics. It can also tell you which email actually gave you the most traffic from which campaign you're using too. If you add that UTM, then it gives analytics that additional information. And then, was it organic or paid content on social media that produced the best results in terms of the bottom line, revenue, profit, and much more information too? So there are several elements of a UTM tag. We first have the website URL, which obviously makes sense. URL stands for the Universal Resource Locator, and this is the page or the pages on your website where your advertising directs potential customers to. Then there is sourcing, which is the platform where your campaigns are, for example, Google search or Facebook. And then there is the medium, which is referring to the type of ad or spend within the resource, for example, PPC or email or display. And then the name, which is the name of your campaign, for example, such as summer_mailer. So here is an example of a URL with a UTM appended to it. Right, ladies and gents, we are at the end of this lesson, and I congratulate you for going the extra mile and making sure that you attend this lesson on time. As you can see, we still have lesson 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 to go in this module before we actually head over to lesson 4. Right, we still got a lot of content to cover, which is always quite exciting. But before we get there, make sure that you recap on all the content that we have covered up until this point so that you can attend lesson 4 with your head held up high, knowing that you're ready to absorb some new, really wonderful material. But until then, that's it for this lesson. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.